Hello, it's Philly here. Just a quick announcement before we jump into today's episode. Natural Medicine Week, hosted by Australian Traditional Medicine Society, is coming up on the 22nd to the 28th of May. I'm a proud ambassador for Natural Medicine Week, which showcases all the many ways natural medicine can restore the body and mind with live online events run by qualified practitioners across Australia. You can check out the link in the show notes to find your way to Natural Medicine Week. As part of the event, I'll be holding a special free root cause of emotional eating masterclass, which you can sign up for via the Natural Medicine Week website. During the masterclass, I'll be digging into emotional eating, food addictions, sugar cravings, and the hidden imbalances in the body that cause this behavior, as well as the metaphysical imbalances that are at the deepest root cause of emotional eating. Hope you can make it. Okay, on to today's episode.
Hello and welcome to the Ending Body Burnout Show. We're your hosts, Chris and Philly, co-founders of multi-award-winning functional medicine practice, serving busy people with energy, mood, and gut issues.
While busyness, overworking, addictive doing, and perfectionism might be the norm, it's not normal, and it's a major contributor to health issues.
Our goal with this show is to give you a holistic root cause approach to healing your body so that you don't have to continue doctor or diet hopping or popping a gazillion supplements hoping something might stick.
So get ready to heal your body, get your spark back, deeply connect with yourself, and step into the life of your dreams. Let's dive in.
G'day guys, thanks for tuning in. I am Chris Billette and I'm here with Philly.
Hello, we are so excited to share our first Connect the Dots episode with you all. This one is all about fatigue, ADHD, and the effects that trauma has on the body. Just so you know what we're talking about when we say a Connect the Dots episode, we're actually taking listeners' cases. So we've had a bunch of people submit their cases to us via a form. I'll put the link in the show notes if you want to submit your case. And then we're putting our detective hats on and we're pulling it apart. So we're looking at not just the symptoms, but what could the symptoms be telling us? What body systems might be out of whack? What lab testing could we run to really identify what's going on in the body? And because we take a root cause approach, we are going to look deeper down in terms of what actually caused the body systems to burn out in the first place. Okay, so before we jump into today's case, just so you know, this is for information, educational purposes only. So this is a bit of disclaimer. It does not replace having an official consult with us or with your medical doctor or practitioner. So what we discussed today is coming from a place, not from a place of advice giving, but rather as looking at a different perspective, looking at your health from a different perspective. So this is the goal with the episode. It's definitely not advice. It's not medical advice, health advice. It's more for information and just to see a different perspective. Oh, and also, before we jump in to workshopping this case, we have a client, our amazing Sam. She is so cool. She is coming on next week to share her own story about chronic fatigue and how she healed it using a root cause approach, which is so exciting to hear because chronic fatigue can absolutely be, I would dare say, cured.
Awesome. Let's rumble.
All right.
Where should we start?
Yeah, well, let's chat about chronic fatigue first because this is a big symptom that this listener is concerned with. So, well, actually, no, I'll read a bit about what she wrote in. So she said, I'm struggling with adrenal fatigue, vaginal imbalances, diagnosed inattentive ADD, depression sometimes, and grinding my teeth when asleep, bleeding gums, struggling to get up on time. So going to dig in to all of those symptoms because they're all connecting and interconnected with each other. But first of all, we love words and we love listening to the words that people are saying because it can really show us a lot of what's going on inside their inner landscape and their subconscious state. So a lot of people, when they put forward their case or even when we're talking to clients, the big word is struggle. Struggling. What does that kind of make you think about, Chris?
So just started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Makes me think of wrestling and grappling and fighting. Really, I think that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a really positive environment, or it can be. I'm sure there's places and situations. Anyway, at the end of the day, it's a martial art. It's a fight, and when someone says they're struggling, I think of me underneath or grappling with one of my mates at the gym and fighting and submitting. And there's a person who is a winner and a loser. And so when someone is struggling and they use the language of struggling, they're ready to be submitted and they're ready to tap out. And that's the first thing that comes to my mind, this fight response.
So it's a real battle. There's a real conflict. And as we go through this case as well, it's not just the health symptoms that she's struggling with, but conflict is actually a pattern in this woman's life, which is really important because we're looking at the symbols as well that give us so much information about what the actual cause is of body burnout. So I wanted to give you a medical definition of chronic fatigue. This is from the Centre of Control Disease. I don't think I said that right. It's a government website.
Amazing. That is. You should go on their ad. It's like, hi, we're from the Centre of Something and Control Disease.
Okay, anyway, I'll put it in the show notes.
We're legit
exactly
and stuff.
What it's called. But I read this definition. So this is for a lot of people who go to their doctors first and they're like, I'm so tired. Actually, there's some stats around this. 1.5 million adults see their doctor each year for tiredness. This is in Australia alone. That would be like so many more people in the world. But so the definition, medical definition is around chronic fatigue. Chronic fatigue is a disease characterised by profound fatigue, sleep abnormalities, pain and other symptoms that are made worse by exertion, which we saw that this lady too is experiencing a whole heap of other symptoms, not just fatigue. So the definition continues, a chronic fatigue syndrome occurs more commonly in women. We see that in our clinic all the time, although it does appear in men as well. The cause of this condition is unknown, but may include environmental or genetic factors. We'll get to this soon because we know that there are some very specific root causes that lead to chronic fatigue, which is where functional medicine shines. The medical definition continues. The main symptom of fatigue has to occur over 6 months or longer. The fatigue often worsens with activity but doesn't improve with rest. And get this, the medical system says there is no cure or approved treatment for this condition. However, some symptoms can be treated or managed to provide relief. How does that feel for you?
But we'll take your money. Come consult with me and I'll sit down with you for 5 minutes and take your $150 fee and send you on your way with my best guess about why I can't help you.
I am not okay with that. I am not okay with that. I know we have a lot of clients come to us too where they feel hopeless. Like this message is sending a hopeless message.
You are hopeless. There's no hope for you.
That you're just going to be chronically fatigued for the rest of your life. And hey, just stop working, stop exercising, sleep a lot, and maybe take some antidepressants, and that's going to help give you a bit of relief.
Or do you want the non-brand prescription?
So we have
save some money.
We've seen time and time again that chronic fatigue can be cured and that you can live a life free of fatigue. And we'll hear from Sam next week where she has done this and she's been on this journey for a while and she's been pretty much fatigue free, chronic fatigue free for the last year or two. Like it's stuck for her. So I wanted to mention some other stats. Chronic fatigue is a big thing. So like real full blown chronic fatigue in Australia is estimated to affect 1% of the population. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that's 250,000 people struggling with full-blown chronic fatigue where they kind of can't function very well in life anymore. But low energy, so we'll talk about energy as well. 50% of Australian adults struggle with energy issues. And there's an awesome lady, Lisa Kordoff. Check her out on Instagram. I'll put a link to her survey. But she surveyed 1,430 women and found that 98.2% don't feel fully rested and that 56.8% rate their energy as 5 or below out of 10. So that's crazy. Like, energy issues are a real thing, and there's not a lot of people who feel like they are fully rested. Insane.
Another thing is, as well, is as soon as this starts having an impact on the rest of your life, on the way you can raise your kids, arguably, I think, and there's stats to show this, we've talked about this before, not on a podcast yet, but in other media, about housework and about roles of women in society in general, in Australia, in our culture. And I think you might think, well, maybe that might have a correlation to fatigue. But really, I mean, is that wrong? Like, is that wrong? You look at those cultural norms, and they're driven, well, what is culture? It's all these beliefs and all these stories that lock a person into a way of being and doing equal a way of having fatigue, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think patriarchy, that could be a whole nother episode.
Yeah, we've got to do that.
Can play a huge role, especially on women's health. But you know what? Also men too, because they're like the breadwinner. They get to go out and make the money. And so there's a lot of expectations from society to perform and do and make more, which absolutely would affect energy. Soul-sucking.
We're living in an exponentially different age of human existence right now. In comparison, health arguably is... people are living longer, but that doesn't necessarily mean happiness levels are up. I mean, across the board, subjective and objective measures of happiness and satisfaction are down, but life longevity is up. What's up with that? That'd be interesting to explore in the future. Let's get back to...
Okay. All right. So let's talk about Antoinette's combo of symptoms and really breaking these down, because when someone presents, like in our clinic, with a big symptom or a condition, I want to know all the other little bits and pieces that go along with that, because they provide clues in terms of where to look next. So she listed alongside fatigue, vaginal imbalances, ADHD, depression, bleeding gums, grinding teeth at night, struggling to get up in the morning, and chemical sensitivities. So first of all, like the first thing I sort of think, okay, she's been diagnosed with ADHD. Chris, you've kind of had some personal experiences on this as well. Like, how do you feel like ADHD could be affecting someone's energy levels?
Well, you're interested in stuff, which is exhausting. I can go and be interested in all the things.
Yeah.
And that's exhausting, right? You and then you put this into a fight response, this stress response, this I think we're going to be talking about this as we go on, but this unhealthy way of responding to stress, I think, can be labeled as ADD and ADHD. And I think there's some subjective measures around it, but there's some clear neurological, emotional, physiological, and psychological objective measures that can indicate something is going on. I
kind of think, like, regardless of whether someone has I'll call it true ADHD, or even if they might have been misdiagnosed and they're showing patterns of it, it's still this, what Chris said, exhausting when you're constantly getting distracted by so many shiny things or different projects. Or we were talking with one of our mentors, Kylie Ryan, yesterday about different notifications that pop up all the time. And we're going to have an expert come on the show soon to talk about that, Dr. Christy Goodwin. And it is like your brain is just burning up glucose, which is energy sapping. So when someone has these neurodivergent patterns and they're also experiencing chronic fatigue or just low energy in general, I'll start thinking about some specific lab testing. So I definitely want to check out the neurotransmitters. So what are your dopamine and adrenaline levels looking like? Because they are very much part of on the go all the time dopamine hits, which is all part of getting distracted. And then also thinking about other body systems that could exacerbate this feeling of your brain not being able to switch off. So things like adrenal stress hormones, which is all about your stress response. And this could, again, not necessarily cause ADHD, but it could definitely be magnifying a dysfunctional pattern of ADHD. Also, the grinding of teeth. So Antoinette mentioned she also grinds her teeth at night, which is a subconscious, like when you're asleep, you're subconsciously doing these things. And so I'd definitely be thinking about some sort of stress response, and that's connected to potentially depression as well.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah.
I think I'll just say this. This is going to weave all through this. There's a fight response going on.
Battle.
Yeah, there's
struggle.
the battle, the struggle. I'm wrestling with this. That are my words. And so I think, grinding teeth, it's a stress response. And so you can't have a symptom unless there's some sort of underlying signal or situation going on in the body systems, right? But why do you have that in the first place? And then it's interesting as we get through this case study, we'll notice, we'll bring up some lab reports and stuff like that. But yeah, just note, it's that the way you do anything, here's a Hermetic principle, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. Blanket statement, but it's interesting for personal development. This is, I'm struggling here. Okay, where else do you struggle? Let's find that out. I grind my teeth. Oh, that's interesting. That sounds like a struggle going on when you're not even awake. When else are you not aware that you're struggling with something? Yeah. Really interesting.
Yeah, I love all that. Just going back to the ADHD, and then we'll move on to other areas. When this listener submitted her case, she said, I tried ADD meds, but they made me feel more anxious. I didn't feel good on them, and I wasn't sleeping right. So most of these medication actually work on the adrenaline and dopamine neurotransmitters. So if someone has been diagnosed with ADHD and they actually feel worse on meds, not better, then I actually start double guessing. I'm like, maybe there actually isn't anything going on with these neurotransmitters. And when someone says they feel worse on a medication, I also start thinking about your detox pathways, because your liver needs to metabolize these synthetic medications. And if someone's liver isn't working very well, it's just putting more stress onto their system. They're not able to metabolize it properly. And so then that can make people feel worse on medications. And it's interesting too that in the case she said that she also has chemical sensitivities and bleeding gums. So having a high toxic load in your body is really inflammatory. It burns through nutrients. It can cause more chemical sensitivities and literally will show up as nutrient deficiencies. For instance, bleeding gums. That's common with people who are burning through vitamin C levels.
So that's a fight again. There's an internal fight. So that's in the same way that there's a battle going on when Antoinette is asleep and she's grinding her teeth. There's a battle going on in her cells with blood is being spilled. Yeah. There's a battleground.
Yeah.
The way you do anything is the way you do everything.
Yeah. And something else, again, we just really love the way that people use words. She said, I didn't feel good on them. Now, this is where being face-to-face with someone in a consult, you can
Good,
really gather
bad.
more information. It's like, what, you didn't feel good in terms of physically in your body, or was there something kind of mental, emotional value going on there too? So I know this lady really values good nutrition and natural living, and so then being put onto a medication that's not natural, is that why, or potentially why she didn't feel good? Maybe that's even why she felt bad and had symptoms on them. Like our brain and our nervous system responds to the way that the language that we're using.
This is very shaming language as well. Good, bad. I didn't feel good. Notice that that's coming from a perception of self. So that's shaming. It's kind of below guilt, isn't it? I feel guilty that I took some things that weren't natural. I didn't feel good, or I felt bad, or whatever she said.
And again, like, we're just kind of reading between the lines. That's where having a consult is going to gather like way more information. But this is just like for informational purposes.
Information.
Just picking and digging into the language that this person is using, because it's always symbolic of other things. Vaginal imbalances. So this is another symptom this lady had, is an interesting link. So it wasn't specific. She didn't specifically say what it was, like whether it was thrush, so that would be candida overgrowth, or sometimes people can have a bacterial vaginosis, which is a bacterial imbalance, or even an STI. But the thing is, when there's chronic vaginal issues, there's a thing called, you've probably heard of leaky gut. So that's where the gut lining starts to separate and you can have particles enter the bloodstream. Well, did you know you can also have a leaky vagina? So that's where the vaginal wall, especially if there's a lot of inflammatory things happening in the vagina, it starts to separate, and then you can have dysbiotic bugs leave the vagina and enter different areas of the body. So potentially there could be something like a chronic candida overgrowth in all areas of the body, or some other inflammatory bacterial overgrowth. And a lot of these microbes produce metabolic byproducts that are very inflammatory and toxic to the body, and have been linked to things like fatigue, depression, and even affecting the brain, the way that the brain works. And then going back to the bleeding gums as well. Well, again, like, that's a sign of a nutritional deficiency. And if your gut's not working very well, then you're not really able to absorb nutrients. Even if you have the most perfect diet, then that could definitely be linked into what's going on with this person.
Super interesting.
And one other body system, and then we'll go deeper into like deeper root causes. But when someone presents with chronic fatigue, I always think about the mitochondria as well. So the mitochondria are little organelles that live in your muscle tissue, and their role is to convert the food that you're eating into ATP energy. So basically it's the energy production part of your body. So if someone has fatigue, I am really curious around, do you feel worse or better after exercise or physical movement? Because if someone feels worse, even if it's going for a walk around the block, or they've done a gym class, and they actually feel more wasted, not better, because remember, exercise should perk us up, then highly likely there's probably something going on with the mitochondria that would need to be tested as well. And we can test all of these body systems that I've been mentioning via spit.
By SPE. Come and do a SPE test. A SPE.
And sometimes we do blood tests as well. All right. So shall we get into some deeper root causes? We've kind of been threading them throughout, but we might dig into some of these a little bit more. So been chatting about the body systems, symptoms, but what, and then, you know, obviously we do lab testing to confirm if our hypotheses are correct or not, which is great. Sometimes I'll have someone, and you'll hear with Sam's story next week, she ticked all the boxes of adrenal fatigue, like all of them, yet her lab test came back with perfect adrenal function. And we both looked at each other and we're like, we don't know how that's happened, but it has. And so then we did further testing and found out that a bunch of other stuff was imbalanced and leading to the fatigue. So you want to get clear on that. And then our next question of inquiry is always, why did these body systems burn out in the first place? So we were talking a lot about this woman's struggle. So she's been struggling with many of these health issues for most of her life. She said most of her life she's had these. And there was a question in our form that she filled in around what was happening leading up to or during the symptom flare-up, because this is such crucial information looking back at the timeline, because again, it can give us so much data around what actually caused this in the first place. So she listed off a few things. So she said she had trauma events, domestic violence in a relationship, that's huge, homeschooling, caring for others also on the spectrum, and helping children heal from the traumatic events and never giving up on them, believing in them but not having enough for my own self-care. So in that tiny little paragraph, I feel that there's a lot going on. It wasn't just like, I don't know, work too hard at work. There's so much going on. And so we wanted to speak into trauma first, because trauma is huge. And before we kind of jump into, she specifically mentioned domestic violence. Chris, do you want to just talk about trauma? Because it's not trauma isn't just about what psychologists call big T trauma. Do you want to kind of explain the many facets of trauma and how it affects our body?
Yeah, well, this could go in depth. Maybe for this one, just to keep it kind of concise. At the end of the day, when things happen in our life experience that are a real trouble, a real hard thing to go through. It can be a trauma in terms of abuse, but it can also be physical. Sometimes it's self-inflicted trauma through sport and injuries or a car accident or something like this. In this instance, domestic violence. So that's where there's been a power dynamic or physical something. I don't think there was any. We don't need to know, but there's going to be I like using the word a shock to the system. Something is now going to be newly programmed into you as a way of being because of this stuff or this thing or this experience that has happened in your life, and that then can. It affects your expectations around partner. This can change your expectations around spouses and partners and people and maybe men in general, or the human race or a place. And then our expectations, I say our because now I'm referring to humanity. So when we go through these experiences that are traumatic, it can put us in a place of self-fulfilling prophecies, and we can why is this happening to me again? And we start to find ourselves in situations like this. I'm not saying that that's what is happening or what has happened, but sometimes we can find that this just turns into an avalanche, that emotions, thoughts, experiences just keeps happening or does happen.
And a lot of the times, this is actually a metaphor that, again, I mentioned Kylie Ryan. She's awesome, my mind coach. But she talks about trauma, and when you haven't really processed it or addressed it properly, or you're repressing or suppressing it, in terms of like trying to push down a balloon underwater. Like this balloon is constantly wanting to pop up. It wants you to address it. It wants you to like let go of it. But something inside of you is constantly trying to push that down, and that is exhausting. Like even from a physical point of view, that is using up a lot of energy to always trying to keep this balloon under the surface.
Suppress it.
And so when I think about like a lot of people with chronic fatigue have some sort of trauma, and again, trauma can be big stuff like rape, physical, sexual, emotional abuse,
violence,
but it can also be little things like, for me, My trauma, which I didn't realize was causing a lot of issues, was getting up in front of 100 people and forgetting my little talk that I was going to say. That was deep humiliation.
Little.
And like it was little T trauma, but it was still producing the same
I don't think it's
feelings.
little T. I think that's big T.
Well, yeah, and I hadn't processed it because as a kid I didn't even know how to do that or that it was a thing, but it was causing these physiological responses in my body of not feeling safe, of feeling like I was constantly being exposed. And so regardless of what type of trauma or negative emotional events that you haven't yet processed, it produces it literally produces unsafety in the body. Your body constantly feels unsafe. It's constantly triggering cortisol, your fight flight hormone, that struggle, that battle. It's also producing neurotransmitters like adrenaline because you need to run away from stuff. And over time, these chemicals and hormones break down your gut and your sex hormones and your detox pathways. And there's even studies around, like so much research coming out about this. So there's a thing called the limbic system trauma loop. So that's a part of the brain which detects threats. And if you haven't addressed trauma, whether it's little or big or whatever the spectrum is, your brain goes into this, I'm constantly unsafe, I constantly need to run or hide. And that develops into chronic symptoms. Like it literally in some point, these unprocessed feelings and emotions and memories will surface dysfunctionally through your body, through symptoms. And it does that in a beautiful way because it's trying to protect you and heal you, but in an unresourceful way. But these symptoms are also trying to grab our attention. Like it's giving us pain so that we can actually respond to that and do something about it, so that we can actually realign our whole self and heal our whole self in deep levels.
I think our body does have a language. Our body does have we use vibration and words, and our language, the way I'm speaking to you right now, is air passed through my mouth and lungs and vibration and my vocal cords, all that sort of stuff. And it conveys meaning, right? And our body also communicates with our conscious awareness. This is not fluff, but think about it. There's a meaning in what we do. And I think about the stress that Antoinette would have felt and the traumatic experiences around her domestic violence and abuse. And I think about my attention goes to vaginal issues. And as a fight flight response, what did we notice in the symptomology? There was a vaginal
Chronic vaginal issues.
Yeah, leaking, escaping, flight response.
If there was, this is the thing, if there was some sort of maybe sexual abuse as well, a lot of women will develop reproductive issues.
Yeah.
I've seen that time and time again. Again, it's like symbols. It's like, where is the pain?
Yeah.
What hasn't been healed, and the body shows up. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. I'll pop his link down below, but I wanted to read something that goes along with everything we just said. So he talks about trauma and the effect it has on the body. So he said, as long as you keep secrets and suppress information, you are fundamentally at war with yourself. There's the struggle again. The critical issue is allowing yourself to know what you know. That takes an enormous amount of courage. And once you start approaching your body and your symptoms with curiosity rather than fear, everything shifts. And this is a huge part of what we do in the Ending Body Burnout method. Most people have had some sort of emotional event that hasn't been processed. I don't think we've worked with anyone that hasn't yet not. And so really getting to the root, this is what we're calling the root cause. We're going beyond just looking at behavior and diet and environmental toxins, although we look at all that as well. But it's like, what is this? What's the stuff that's hidden that's causing you to think, feel, behave, and literally have the health that you currently have now. And that's where you can end your body burnout. Yeah. I'm getting emotional because I so wholeheartedly believe in this, that this is the way of the future for healthcare.
Can I just talk about the balloon? I think about it more like a basketball, something hard. I was at my sister-in-law and brother-in-law's pool they've got, and I was pushing a basketball, a hard ball underneath the surface, and I got distracted and it flew up and it hit me in the chin, and dong, and that hurt a lot. And I think I bit my lip or something like that. Anyway, getting to the point is sometimes it's not soft like a balloon that kind of gently floats up to the surface. Sometimes trauma or suppressed emotion, things that we're fighting against, that our body and our consciousness is fighting against, flings up and smacks us in the face like a basketball, something hard that maybe draws blood. And that, I tell you what, that caused a fight-flight response in me. But then we hear so often, I've worked with my psychologist, I've been to the doctor, I've jumped on ADHD medication, I've done the work. So why is the ball do you keep pushing the ball underneath the water and smacking in your face?
Add a few, some other things we hear. Oh, I do meditation. I've done breath work. I've gone to a inner child workshop. I've done the work.
I'm all finished now.
The thing is, the proof is in the pudding. So if your body is still screaming at you, you've started the work, but you haven't done the work. And if we're honest, the work continues for the rest of your life, but it gets to a point where you end body burnout, you're symptom free. And then the work continues to continue self-regulating and self-loving yourself. One more thing around trauma before we move on to just one other thing that we picked up in the case data. So one of my coaches who I worked with last year, Jamin Fraser, has a different perspective around trauma and PTSD. So he said that it's not actually about the events that happen to you. It's about a broken rapport with yourself. So essentially whatever happened to us, it's the story we created about ourselves based on what happened to us. So if I go back to my little story about not remembering anything, crying my eyes out in front of 100 people, feeling so ashamed, feeling humiliated, hear the words that I'm saying. Essentially, I made this belief that I can't get up and speak in front of people. I can't share my voice because something inside of me is weak and incapable. And so that belief continued causing all sorts of dysfunctional patterns and health issues. And in this listener's data, we have a few little checklists in terms of patterns as well. And she has identified that she constantly has feelings of shame, guilt, low self-confidence and apathy, which is so common with people who haven't addressed trauma or negatively emotionally charged events.
Yeah, so when you're in at that level of shame, your life view is miserable. And sometimes the reason why we might struggle, I think of soldiers in Gallipoli and trudging through the trenches of battle and the misery the soldiers wrote in their literature, the miserable conditions, rats and waste and filth and death, and there was the view was misery and shame. David Hawkins talks about this, that shame is perilously close to death. Sometimes we choose subconsciously to end our life, and that's not about
I'm so embarrassed I could die.
I'm so embarrassed I could die. Yeah, and we that's a and then we feel guilt and shame that we feel the guilt and shame, and there's this process that we suppress that, and sometimes it's that emotion about the thing that is the basketball that we're pushing or the balloon that we're pushing underneath the water. It might not be the event, and so sometimes when we hear I've done the work. Yeah, you've brought that balloon up out of the water, and now there's some emotions around that, and sometimes there's emotions about the emotions that you've got about that. It's like this matrix, this web. And you maybe that's the thing that you're suppressing. Maybe.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because we have worked with people who have felt like they've worked with, say, a therapist or a psychologist. They feel like they no longer have that ickiness in their body when they think about the traumatic event. But when I say to them, do you believe that you're good enough, worthy enough, lovable? Most of the time they cannot say any of that. So it's kind of like, great, trauma, stress response to that has been addressed, but now we got to look at like the nuances and the shadows that has evolved over time from that event, which is, I feel like, what we're quite good at.
Yeah.
Just one other thing that I wanted to pick up around the words that Antoinette said. So she sounds like she has a very big heart. She's dealing with a lot herself, physically, emotionally, mentally, psychologically. But amongst all that, she's also homeschooling children, caring for others on the spectrum, and helping children heal from the traumatic events and never giving up on them. Big, big heart right there. Straight after that, she says, but not having enough of my own self-care. So it sounds like, again, if we use the word struggle or the metaphor of struggle, she's struggling with procrastination. She's feeling stuck and she's struggling to stay consistent with self-care. Yet on the flip side, again, just pulling out more data, she also says that she's often hurrying, rushing, and addictively doing. So it's not like she's not doing anything. She's filling up her time doing something, and it sounds like a lot of this is caring for other people, which is a pattern of rescuer martyrdom.
Yeah, and she's using language that's shaming and then bumping up into more energetic, doing things for others, and so that's on the surface that's nice. And sometimes we find that this doingness is a flight response. It's what, when you really dig into it, why are you doing that? Why? What does that give you? How does that help you? What's the purpose of that? And we get our little emotion shovels out and we start digging in. And we start to find feelings of vindictiveness or shame or guilt or not self-love. And so the most you could possibly hope for out of that is action. And I love zombies. I love The Walking Dead, and I often think, well, they're alive too. Or they're moving around, but they're not really alive. And sometimes we can go through life like a bit of a zombie, can't we? Not dead, but not really alive.
And it is a common trauma response where you're running, doing, and doing a lot of stuff for other people, because essentially that feels safe. Like you're deflecting that deeper healing, which may feel scary, may feel painful initially. And so when you put your energy into other people, that feels good too, because you're getting probably some external validation back from other people that, oh, you are a good human being because you're doing stuff for other people, but essentially you're running away from that broken rapport with yourself, that you don't feel good enough or worthy enough or lovable. And so that's a big pattern that we see.
And then can I throw another one in? Okay, now this is where shame also comes in. When we start to base our identity on the things that we can do and that we do, helping, homeschooling, being a partner, and then all of a sudden our source of security around ourselves and this certainty around ourselves, when we can't do the things that we based our whole sense of self on, when that ability to do goes away and fades or is taken from us, we can have a bit of a crisis, an existential crisis, a void of identity, and we drop right down into shame and guilt and apathy. Apathy is this despairing, hopeless state of being where I can't I won't. This sort of language comes up. And then when we try, it's a struggle.
And also too, that dropping down into apathy or running away. So this lady also had a pattern of trying the next thing but never really following through a whole process. It's like, maybe this is a bit of an ADHD pattern of like, oh, a new shiny thing. But
this will rescue me from my hopeless state. Shiny thing. Help me.
But then not following through a whole process. And sometimes too, at a deep, deep level, it's actually an act of protection and self-love because maybe it's not actually safe to be well. Maybe it's actually not safe to heal because deep down, someone might believe that they cannot heal, that they don't have what it takes to be well, or if they get healthy and well, they're going to have to like show up in life in a different way, and that might also feel really scary. So I think we've covered like a lot of stuff. I think you can see too, hopefully this has given you a different perspective on chronic fatigue and ADHD and some of those other symptoms we've listed. And again, we take a very holistic approach. So we still look at the physical. We want to really look at what body systems are burnt out because then we can help reset, kill off something nasty in there, build it up. That physiologically helps you heal. But in order to truly end your body burnout, you've got to look deeper into why that happened in the first place and really look at all these hidden dysfunctions inside the body, the environment, the mind, and the subconscious state that's causing their health issues to show up in the first place.
Yeah, you know what? I actually honed in a little language there from you.
Ooh.
You gotta. And you know
sorry.
what? No, don't feel shame or guilt.
Chris always does this to me.
Always.
Sometimes.
Hey, look, got to. No, you don't. You don't got to. You don't got to. Do you?
That sounds very bogan too. You gotta do this. Just gotta. You don't have to.
Yeah, but this, as we said at the start, you totally can. This is for, at the end of the day, this is a podcast. This is entertainment, but it's based on real stuff, real stories, real experiences. I feel like there's a CIS.
All right. So if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to see more, and maybe even if you'd like to see your own case reviewed, go to the show notes. There'll be an application form there. Send it through to us. It's anonymous as well. So don't feel like everyone's going to know everything. It's completely anonymous.
Yeah, you get to choose if we use yours or a pseudonym.
Yeah. And then also just a reminder for next week, tune into our client Sam. I have a chat with her about how she overcame chronic fatigue, brain fog, anxiety, gallstone attacks, and gut issues using our ending body burnout method. We're so excited for you to hear that story, and it would just help you provide evidence that you can get over all of this stuff.
Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you so much for listening. We so appreciate you. If you'd like to give us extra smiles, drop us a review and spread the love by sharing this episode.
You can also rate your own state of burnout and the root cause contributors by taking our Ending Body Burnout assessment on our website. And if you're interested in learning about our group or one-on-one Ending Body Burnout programs, shoot us a DM via Instagram or Facebook. Have the best day ever.